Okay, Ron, you're ready to go.
Okay. It says that I have to ask administrator to enable meeting summary with AI companion. Oh, okay. There we go. Forget it.
Yep.
Okay, so I call this talk demanding renewables, and you'll figure out why. And I'm going to talk about the basic characteristics of solar electricity, which I call PV, and wind in Colorado in the XL Colorado balancing area, but it's similar for most of Colorado. And starting about now in Colorado, you can really choose how clean your electricity is that you charge your EV with, for example. And the choices that you make determine the decisions of which power plants to install clean ones instead of dirty ones, which influences where our power comes from for the next 30 years. So I'm going to be talking mostly about wind, solar, electricity, EVs, and storage in this talk. And I rely a lot on Energy Information Agency data, and you can just go to their website and click on this bubble, and it's the Public Service Company of Colorado. And what you'll get from this is the hourly demand. This is electricity demand in black. Wind is in green. Coal is in dark brown. Gas is in light brown. And solar here is in yellow. And so you can see the PV coming on every day during daytime. Hydro is in blue. And you can see that we have very little hydro. And so I'm going to start by talking about solar. And this shows the solar in megawatts output. This was in 2019 in Colorado versus hour of the day, so 1 through 24. And it's no surprise that it peaks at noon. It might surprise people that it peaks almost as much sunshine in winter as during spring or summer. The big difference being the length of the day, of course. So let's look at 10 o'clock here, and there are 90 days in the spring. So let's look at all 90 days. And we can see that there are a lot of days that are very bright and sunny. There are very few days with no renewables during daytime, especially in spring and summer, but also in fall and winter. So this is PV. This is solar electricity. So let's look at wind. And the thing that surprises people about wind is that, contrary to what they may have heard, wind blows equally almost every hour of the day during 3 seasons of the year. During the summer, it drops a little in midday, but most of the time it's absolutely constant. But let's look at the 90 different days at 10 o'clock like we did for solar. And we see the challenge with wind, that there are actually a lot of hours when there is wind not blowing. And so wind is not nearly as consistent as solar. There will be a few windy days and then a few calm days. So wind is a lot harder to work with. And during the nights, of course, if you have these calm nights with no wind, the electricity supply is almost 100% coal and gas. So I'm going to pull these two parts together and look at kind of a map. And so I'm going to plot fossil fuel in black and 100% renewable in green. And then the shades in between are when you have a combination of the two. And this is 1 a.m. on January 1st. This is noon. And this is midnight. And then if you plot all the days across the year, you get this, this map. And what we can see, this is for the future, what Excel projects for 2030. And daytimes are very clean because of the solar. That's the bright green here. Nights, because it's wind, can be very clean if it's windy, very dirty if it's not windy. And so if you take the annual average, this is also very useful. And I plot fossil fuel percentage on this axis versus time of day. We can see how clean daytime will be in 2030. It's amazing. This is the real projection for what they plan to install. This is not all approved quite yet, but it's going in this direction for sure. So let's back up to the present. Okay, I'll just say that what this means is that we can choose to use clean energy by just using energy during daytime when you have this kind of characteristic. So I'm going to back up to the present, 2023, and we see all of the features that we're going to have in 2030, but we don't yet have as much PV during daytime. But in any case, if you charge your EV, for example, during daytime, you'll be using half as much electricity that was generated by fossil fuel as if you do it at night. And this is just on average. So if we go back into the recent past, I'll show you what 2019 looked like. And it's totally different because the PV that we have now, most of it came online in June of this year. And so I show you this because it didn't used to matter what time of day you used electricity. And I also show this because utility planning and regulators look at history in order to be conservative about their choices. They want to make choices based on something that's real. And if you look at history, you don't plan for renewables. And this is a problem. Some of the policies that we have right now were designed for this system. And we don't have that system anymore. Now we have this one. And so I'll go back to the future, 2030, when daytime is 5 times cleaner than night. And I'll point out that what this means is that if you're working on energy efficiency, you should work on night because we don't have many carbon emissions during the daytime in the near future. And so next I'll talk about EV charging. And Xcel has 3 different programs that they promote. And one is a night charging from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The second one is also night, but it's 12:30 to 9:30 a.m. the next day. The third one they call daytime, which is 6 a.m. to 3, but we know that many seasons of the year, 6 is still dark. So I created a fourth one, which is starting when the sun is warm and going till 3 in the afternoon. What I'm going to show is if you bought an EV in 2019, then you were using 70% fossil fuel to charge it. And if you use the night schedules, this has improved a fair bit by 2023, and it improves a little more by 2030. But it's really slow, and it doesn't go to completely clean. Now, if you were to use a daytime charging schedule, you're all the way down here at 30% fossil fuel electricity in 2023. And by 2030, you'll be using just 10% fossil fuel electricity. So this is already quite good plan. But there's another alternative, which is to charge during the daytime and install new PV. You could install it on your roof, or your demand that you put on the system will actually encourage Xcel or whoever to install it, because demand that comes during daytime, the cheapest way to serve that is by putting PV in. So if your use of power during daytime causes more PV to be installed, then that car is 100% clean. And that's the key. And so I want to go back to this curve for 2030 and point out another issue, which is that if you have daytime, which is totally clean, then the price paid for solar electricity at noon drops to zero. And at this point, you don't get any more solar electricity installed because it's a money-losing proposition. And the opponents of renewables really like to play this up. They call it the lurking threat to solar power's growth. They call it solar value deflation, other things. But there's a way around this. This isn't necessarily true. This is only true if you assume that demand growth is at night. You can attack this dirty fossil fuel generated power at night in several ways. The first one is just shift demand to daytime, and then you add PV to keep daytime clean. And this allows you to add PV. It supports the price of PV. It makes it profitable to install PV, and it cuts the carbon emissions at night. A second way to do this is to use batteries for some of your power use at night, and then charge them during the daytime using the PV. This is doing exactly the same thing as in the last slide, except of course it's going to be more expensive because you have to buy the batteries. And also batteries are only about 80% efficient. So you actually waste 20% of the power, of the hopefully renewable power that you're using to charge these batteries. So this is kind of a second choice. To the extent that you can shift power, it's 100% efficient at using more renewables. And so I'll talk about the fossil nuclear paradigm, which is our past, and then the renewables paradigm, which is our future. In the fossil nuclear grid, you had excess capacity during late night into morning because of the coal and gas plants that were essentially idling because they didn't have high demand in the early hours of the morning. And so the advice the utility would give you, and the environmental groups as well, would be to charge your EV from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the cheap electricity from the excess capacity of coal and gas. The emissions intensity for this strategy is very high because you're charging mostly on coal and gas. And even when you have wind on the calm nights, you're charging on wind, on coal and gas. So the renewable paradigm is that you have excess capacity during daytime from PV or windy nights in Colorado. And you have low electricity prices. This is at the wholesale level when renewables are available. And so you want to charge your EV during daytime or when wind and PV are available. The emissions intensity is clearly lowest when renewables are available. So this strategy is using the lowest emissions intensity. And what this does is you get into a virtuous circle where if you charge more on renewables, this creates demand for more renewables. When you install the more renewables, you have the low-priced electricity, and it drives the price down for when the renewables are available. And this new demand creates more use of low-priced electricity, more installations, and so it's virtuous. On the other hand, if you stick with the old advice of charging your car at night, for example, then you're probably prolonging the use of baseload coal. You're keeping it on to meet the demand at night on the calm nights. And it might even encourage the installation of new gas as you're retiring the coal. So this is not a good idea. So I'll ask, why not just do it? Because the utility doesn't tell you when to use your power. And so there's no real reason why the utility has to be the solution there. And I'm going to ask, if there was an app that told you when the grid was renewable, and maybe it actually controlled your EV charger, maybe a few other things like hot water heating, would you sign up? Or do people really need to be incentivized with rate structures and things that regulators would do? And I'll warn you here that rate structures and regulation is extremely slow. We're on kind of a 5-year schedule to update the time of use rates, for example, at the PUC. I'm working on this. And for sunlight, you really don't need any information because we all know when the sun's out. It's, this is making hay while the sun shines strategy. Now, if you want to charge at night, you're going to be using wind. And we don't have this information available from our utility, XL. So I use Southwest Power Pool, which is the states to the east of us. And this is a week ahead prediction of wind and PV on the system, as well as demand up here for a week in January. And this is what reality was relative to the prediction. And you can see that they do pretty well with predicting wind. And it's just obvious which nights you should charge your EV if you have this information. January 15th was awesome. The 16th at midnight was not good. The 17, 18, and 19 were pretty good. And so if you had this information, you could charge almost 100% on renewables at night. So I'm thinking that what we want is something like a weather forecast, but have it for renewables. I told you that daytime is almost always very green in Colorado from this point forward. Of course, there will be a cloudy day every once in a while, but we know when that's going to happen. If you need to charge at night, it's a little bit dicier. You would really like to know when the wind is blowing in eastern Colorado, not necessarily in Denver and Boulder. And if you could do this, or you had it automated so that your EV charger and your hot water heater just did this automatically, it could follow through and use almost 100% clean electricity. Now, there are other solutions for doing this, and these are infrastructure solutions that really you want to encourage EV charging where the car is during the daytime. For many people that work from home, this can be their garage, or if they have enough hours during the weekend where their car is in the garage. A typical car only needs about 8 hours of charging on a level 2 charger per week. And so that could be the way to do it. Otherwise, you want to have the chargers at places of work, places where people spend time during the daytime. Now, I'll just point out that we're not totally devoid of information. I'm a nerd. So if I want to know if it's a good night to charge at night, I look up the National Weather Service at Cheyenne Wells, Colorado, which is adjacent to XL's biggest wind plant. And we can see that on this day and this night, the average wind speed at the ground was 15 miles per hour, which is a lot of wind. And these would have been good nights to charge the car. And this actually goes out for an entire week. Now, what happens if the utility makes assumptions? This is where it gets really interesting for me. This is the annual forecast for load on this scale in megawatt hours, maybe it's gigawatt hours. And this is years out through 2048. And most of the load growth is EVs. So we're really relevant talking about EV charging. And down here, we can see this is megawatts versus hours, the demand curve that the utility forecast for these EVs. And we see that they're assuming that all EVs charge at night from 7 p.m. till 6 a.m. And this, of course, is completely wrong from what I've been telling you. I replotted it here to show the EV charging at the bottom. And this is what Excel is assuming, that it's in the wee hours of the morning and then evening starting at 7 p.m. And so the question that I want to ask is, what if we did this instead and synchronized most EV charging, or as much as is easy, during daytime? And essentially, this one's ready for gas. If they project this demand in the future, then they have to build gas plants to provide this energy at night. This one is ready for renewables. If you have this load profile, then you're going to build renewables. People always ask me, why not just charge a battery during the daytime and then charge your EV at night when it's convenient off of the battery? And of course this works. You can do this, but I'll point out that the most expensive part of an EV is the battery. And this strategy kind of requires that you have 2 batteries for every car. Also, again, the batteries are not 100% efficient at storing the energy, so you're wasting 20% of the solar energy that you went to all the trouble to make renewable. So batteries work, but they're the second choice when you've done all the demand shifting that you can accomplish. So I'll point out that this talk was not just about EVs. Any of your electricity use that you can use this strategy allows you to shift more of it from fossil fuels to green energy. And of course, this should be lower cost if the cost of low-cost renewables were being passed through. It is lower pollution. It rewards renewables immediately because demand during daytime means that the price that the independent power producer gets for selling the PV into the system is higher. It rewards renewables in the next resource plan, because if the demand curve is growing during daytime instead of night, then you install PV. And the last point here I'll make is that energy efficiency spending in the future is best spent on those things that use electricity at night. And this is going to be winter heating. And so it's things like insulation and building envelope. So if you want to get going on this, are we ready for renewables? Of course, I've said, yes, you can just charge during daytime. You don't need anyone's permission for that. If you want to go farther, then you need a renewables forecast in order to use wind at night effectively. And there are infrastructure solutions. So these are things that you can talk to your city and state about to do the EV infrastructure so that you're charging during the daytime. And of course, we know that the high voltage DC chargers are expensive. So this would be where the cars sit for 8 hours. You know, at some places of business, they're going to sit 40 hours a week. You could encourage your city to do pilot projects to see how much energy you can shift and actually track the progress. Because I think in the clean energy transition, people like to see results. And this is an area where we could have overnight results. Just to show you that this is real, this is the CO2 trend for California on a day in April. And you can see that when the PV turns on, the carbon emissions drop to nearly 0. And so the conclusion of this talk is obviously use clean energy. And this enables, it actually demands a clean future grid at the lowest possible cost. And so this brings me back to where we started, that this talk is about how the individual, the city, the county, the state, can actually demand renewables. So thank you. And I think there's time for questions.
Ron, I have a question. When you're talking about the batteries being 80% efficient, is that pretty much with all battery chemistries, or are there some chemistries more efficient than others?
Well, the most efficient is lithium ion. And when you look at the round trip efficiency, you also have to account the inverters on both ends, the inverter that charges the battery and then the inverter that comes back out at the end. So a typical number for the most efficient system round trip is 83% for lithium ion. Now, some of the battery chemistries that we're hearing about for long-term storage, like iron air, which Xcel has announced, those could be as low as 30%. And so you can see that batteries are super useful, especially for reliability and for peaking in the evening when electricity can be very expensive. But they're a second choice, especially in the near future. People believe that the cost of batteries will come down, but right now they're pretty expensive if you go to get a Tesla Powerwall or something.
What is the percentage efficiency for lithium ion?
So for the system, it's 83%. I've seen, for lab, I've seen quotes in the 90s, but that's for the battery cell itself. Once you wire them all together and put the electronics to get the energy in and the electronics to get it out, it's 83% is the number I see most often.
Do you see V to G playing into this at all?
So V to G, I'm more skeptical than most people on V to G. And so I'll lay out my thinking process and you can see if it makes sense to you. First off, you need to charge the battery with 100% renewables, because if you're charging it on coal and gas, then you're increasing the emissions on the grid by this 17% efficiency loss when you put the power back into the grid. So clearly you have to already be charging your batteries off of renewables before you even think of V to G, or else you're actually increasing carbon emissions. And, there are other challenges because of the efficiency loss. You need a pretty big price differential between the time that you charge the battery and the time that you put it back into the grid, because you're going to lose 17% of the energy. And so you need the energy to be 17% cheaper when you charged it than when you put it back into the grid. And there have been studies. And so, I think there are some challenges. When I figure out how much good can be done by just charging the cars at the right time, you get most of the economic value of V to G with none of the hassles, none of the extra hardware, none of the new regulations. You don't have to work with the utility. You can do it today. And you're accomplishing, much or probably even most of what you would get with full V to G. That's kind of my line of thinking. And I'm really open to hearing other points of view.
Have you heard about what the Green Mountain Power is doing in Vermont? They are building virtual power plants. It's not V to G, it's H to G, because what they're doing is they're subsidizing the purchase of Tesla Powerwalls, and then they're using that battery to that 4,500 batteries already online at consumers' homes, and that battery is then used to handle peak demand so that they don't have to build another power plant.
Yeah, so that would work. That works best in areas that are used to having blackouts, because that's where people buy those batteries. And so if people have bought those batteries, then yeah, awesome. I think in areas that don't have reliability problems, you don't have nearly as many people buying batteries because they're quite expensive. And so the other thing that comes into that is that in Vermont, you have you do have a lot of blackouts because the trees fall on the power lines. And so you have a different situation than most urban areas. And so I think that's very geographically specific. It applies here, but to a lesser extent than Vermont or Alaska or somewhere where you actually have reliability problems going out to the end of the grid. And the grid is very expensive. The conventional grid is very expensive. So batteries are more competitive. Do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I was just thinking that the battery to grid wouldn't be, if you have an outage, then the power is down. You need those power lines for that power to go back to the grid, right? So actually, it's not a solution for the utility. It's only a solution for the homeowner if you're talking outages as opposed to peak demand. And in this case, that depends on the grid being up for them to use that to handle peak power needs.
That's how I see it, that basically the utility is thinking, what is the cheapest way to give customers satisfaction with fewer blackouts? And it's to put a battery in their house. So it's really aimed at the blackout question rather than the other.
Because the way it was phrased in the article that I read was that it eliminates the need for them to have a gas plant to handle sudden demand. So it's cheaper for the utility to subsidize people installing batteries in their homes that they can draw upon than to build another power plant to handle peak loads.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with blackouts.
So I think the economics for that is different in every geography. It's a possibility that works.
Yeah, and I suspect that, when I read about the same article and it feels like, they're kind of taking advantage of both things, right? You got the reliability issue. They also have an issue with, a lot of far-flung homes and whatnot. So if they have to do upgrades to the distribution grid to reach homeowners who are, especially in Vermont, buying a lot of electric cars, they can defer those investments as well. So they're kind of getting 2 or 3 benefits out of it. And I kind of agree that it makes sense in certain geographies like that. Perhaps Northern California, where you have these power shutoffs for wildfire risk. And, like you said, even here in Colorado, maybe in very specific instances up in the mountains and stuff where it makes sense. But I thought it was very interesting. I read the article, but I think they're selling it as like this one particular thing, but I think there's more to it than they're really saying.
Yeah, that's exactly how I think about it. It depends on the details of the distribution grid that you have when it makes sense.
Yeah, you got to remember too, in a place like Vermont, it's a lot of propane heating. It used to be oil heating and whatnot, and so homes there, I'm from upstate New York, so it's similar there, and homes there just don't have a huge electricity demand. You put an EV on, and all of a sudden you're doubling or tripling your electricity demand, and they're gonna have to upgrade just miles and miles of distribution grid lines, transformers, so on and so forth. So I can see how it just quickly make economic sense for them just from that standpoint. And then you have all these other added benefits.
Yeah, I think you want it in the mix, and you want to do the economic analysis for it to compare it to the combustion turbine and whatever else, whatever other advantages it has, but it'll come out ahead in some places and behind in others.
I have a question about lithium-ion batteries, because I've been told that they have a lifespan, and that it's like 1,000 cycles of charging and discharging. But in my Tesla, I've been driving Tesla since 2014. Never had a battery do anything more than degrade about 10% at maximum on my 3 Teslas, and I've driven 200,000 miles. I charge almost every day. I mean, and there are 365 days to the year. So I figure I've gone through many more than 1,000 cycles, which is only 3 years of daily charging. So what is the true story? By now they must have information that is a little more reliable because of usage.
Yeah, so the story is that it depends on whether you fill the battery each time and whether you empty it each time. So the depth of the cycle matters a lot. A lot of the warranties on the utility scale systems are about 10 years. And that's if you're using them at 80% depth of discharge. So I think they're still learning, and the batteries are getting better with time. But I think it's kind of 80% at 10 years is what I'm seeing most often.
Well, that was probably just a wild ass guess back when they were new, because they didn't really know. All my batteries are old. My 2014 battery is still going in the car that I had in 2014, my 2015 and my 2017. They're not new batteries.
I think it's also, we're lucky to live in Colorado, which is a cooler climate. You know, in Arizona, they had a lot of trouble with the Nissan Leafs. So
that was because they didn't have the cooling battery management system and cooling that Teslas have. By the way, that 2014 Tesla has been in Arizona, in Phoenix area, because that's where I sold it in 2016 or so.
This is all good news.
I mean, I think recurrent, can you hear me?
Yes.
Recurrent that we had them on a meeting at one point. So they do a lot of battery research. They found it seems like their kind of take-home message is that the degradation in batteries, even the Leaf, is less than what people have predicted. And I think recently they found, even with Teslas, that if you fast charge all the time, even that doesn't really affect the battery degradation as much as people predicted originally.
I've had good luck with my car too. I haven't seen any degradation in 4 years so far.
Yeah, the chemistry matters a lot too. You know, some of the newer Teslas are ILFP, and those will have a lot more cycle life than lithium ion, and the newer lithium ions are better than the older stuff that was, you know, in the early 2010s and whatnot. It's just technology keeps improving quite a bit and doesn't get talked about because it's very incremental, but it's quite a bit better today. If you want an actual degradation curve, look up DNV. They do a lot of like research and whatnot, and they have some you know, real results looking at like, and it makes assumptions like that you're charging and discharging it, you know, 80% every day or something like that, and gives you some interesting information about it.
Yeah. So please, you know, give me some feedback about my pitch, whether it's effective, whether you believe it. I'm always interested.
I certainly had not thought of what you were teaching, I had not thought about how I shouldn't charge at night, that I should charge during the day. Now, but I am now, but I charge during the day almost always because I have lifetime free supercharging, and I charge at the local Tesla supercharger, and I always do that during the day.
Awesome.
We should probably move on to Ed's talk. Thanks a lot, Ron. That was great. I actually have a whole bunch of questions, but I will I will restrain myself. And so let's hear from Ed.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me again. I am going to share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I know I've presented this program in the past. It was about 8 months ago now, so I don't know what everyone remembers, and maybe there are some people on this call that did not see that presentation. So I will provide a brief recap, high-level overview of the program, discuss some program updates, and then answer any questions you all might have. So beginning with this high-level overview, Vehicle Exchange Colorado, it's abbreviated as VXC. It is funded through the Community Access Enterprise that was created by State Senate Bill 21260. It is a state-funded program. The objective is it's a point-of-sale rebate program for income-qualified Coloradans. It incentivizes replacing old or high-emitting vehicles with electric vehicles. We launched the program on August 31st, so approximately a month and a half ago. I'm happy to say that the amount of interest we've received in the program has been fantastic. We've been very happy with what we've seen in terms of participation. We have a program administrator named Aptum. Aptum is also the program administrator for the City and County of Denver e-bike rebate program. They also handle the Boulder e-bike rebate program, and they handle our statewide e-bike rebate program, which launched on August 16th, so approximately 2 months ago. And for VXC, we also work with Clear the Air Foundation. They're a nonprofit organization that handles the vehicle recycling component. Clear the Air Foundation, they've been in existence for well over 10 years. They've coordinated the recycling of approximately 6,500 vehicles in Colorado to date. So let's talk about eligibility requirements. They're largely the same as what I last presented to this group back in February. So a VXC program participant needs to be a resident of Colorado, income qualified, and have their old or high emitting vehicle replaced with an EV. A participant, to meet the income eligibility requirements, a participant must meet one or more of the following criteria. The household income needs to be below 80% of the area median income, also known as AMI. So this varies by county. It is one set of amounts for Boulder County as opposed to Denver County, and so on. In lieu of that, if the participant is enrolled in any number of authorized financial assistance programs, we have a complete list on the VXC website, which is linked on the slide deck. I'll put it in the chat after the presentation as well. But programs include SNAP, RTD Live, the CARE program, and so on. The older high emitting vehicle eligibility requirements, this is not a complete list, but this definitely covers the majority of it. The vehicle title needs to be issued solely to the participant and must not have a lien. So that means there cannot be an outstanding loan for the vehicle. The vehicle needs to be gasoline or diesel powered. It also must meet one or more of the following criteria. The vehicle model year needs to be at least 12 years old. So if you're applying this year, 2023, your vehicle model year would need to be 2011 or older. And in lieu of that, if the vehicle fails an emissions test in Colorado, the model year is no longer required. Once again, we have a complete list of eligibility requirements on the DEVC website, and I'll be sure to share this slide deck with your group after this presentation. Moving on to the rebate amounts for Vehicle Exchange Colorado. These are the same as before. So new battery electric vehicle, as this group knows, also known as a BEV, or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, also known as a PHEV. It's a $6,000 point of sale rebate for a new BEV or PHEV. For a used BEV or PHEV purchase or lease, it's a $4,000 point of sale rebate. And any lease through Vehicle Exchange Colorado needs to be at least 2 years. Stackability, we received a lot of questions about this, and this might have changed. Actually, I think this is the same as before, but in any event, participants can stack the Vehicle Exchange Colorado rebate with the federal tax credit in either a state tax credit or a rebate from Xcel Energy or Black Hills Energy. Participants are not able to combine the utility rebates with the state tax credit at this time. Now, that might change with the new Transportation Electrification Plan, also known as a TEP, with Xcel Energy. That could change in the near future. But as of right now, that is where we currently are in terms of stackability. One key program change I want to highlight here for Vehicle Exchange Colorado is the MSRP limit. So when we last presented this program to this group, it was a $50,000 MSRP or purchase price limit. We've changed that to an eligible participant for VXC being eligible to receive a rebate for any new BEV or PHEV with an MSRP of $80,000 or less. This aligns more closely with the state tax credit for EVs. And then for used, this is the same as before. The final negotiated purchase price must be $50,000 or less. We have a note here that the final negotiated price does not include destination charges or optional items added by the dealer or taxes and fees. So having said that, I want to open the floor to any questions you might have. We have the Vehicle Exchange Colorado website listed on this slide. My email is as well. I will put both in the chat, but in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. Thank you.
My first question is, could somebody buy a junker for $200 and then have it in their name and use it, or is there a time that you have to have owned it before you can use it for the exchange?
There is not a minimum amount of time required to own the older high emitting vehicle. So the participant would need to meet all of those eligibility requirements that I mentioned, as well as what is listed on the website. So that means the older high emitting vehicle needs to be registered under the participant's name, title issued solely to them, etc. But if the participant meets all of those requirements, then there is no length of time required.
So you said that on the last slide there was the maximum price of 80,000 did not include dealer added options. Do you know if so Tesla has a full self-driving package, which is kind of expensive, $12,000 right now. Is that included in the maximum or not? Do you know?
So
It's a
for
software update, but
right. So for the MSRP of 80,000, that's for new. The used is $50,000 for the final negotiated purchase price. With the MSRP, the way we define it is based on how the DOR, the Colorado Department of Revenue, defines it. So it would just depend on whether that meets their definition or not. We are completely aligned with how they determine MSRP. And on the Vehicle Exchange Colorado website, just to give you a better answer, sorry, Julia, if you look at that website, we do have the MSRP guidance document list. Linked. Let me give you the actual link though. I'll put that in the chat, and that will help you figure out how the MSRP is defined. If I may ask, if anyone is open to sharing, has anyone from this group applied for a VXC rebate? If you're open to sharing.
I think we're probably a unique group because we probably don't have an old gas car hanging around in the back.
Yeah, I realized as I was asking that was probably the wrong group to ask.
So,
except Jim, who's on his way to a junker yard to buy a $200 car for that credit.
I don't need another EV.
No, gas car.
No, but I don't. Yeah, I don't need to buy one using that program. And I think probably most of us in this group, being long-term owners of EVs, probably are earning over 80% of the AMI.
Understood.
So Ed, I remember seeing a study of the pre-IRA federal incentives, which were, I don't remember what they were now, $5,000 or something with a manufacturer's cap. So even those, only half of Americans had ever heard of it. When, at the end, when it was closing. So it seems like these incentives, one of the most important things is to make sure that people know about them. I mean, I do a lot of EV shows, and recently I've been telling people about these, and I have this little thing I give people. But what can we do as the Denver Electric Vehicle Council to tell people about these incentives? Because honestly, they really make EVs cheaper than gas cars by quite a bit, even just a sticker price, not to even consider the total cost of ownership.
Yeah, another excellent question, and all great questions. This website I might have shared in the past, and this group might already be aware of it either way. EVCO, that is a state website, state resource we have to educate the public about electric vehicles. And the link, the subpage that I just put in that chat, that really breaks down all of the financial incentives as of this time. That includes the tax credits, the different rebate options, including VXC. We also have this great infographic that shows how the tax credits work. So I would highly recommend, let me give the main page for EVCO. Let me give that website address as well. But that's a resource that I am constantly referring people to that want to learn more about EVs. And again, I know this group is obviously very familiar with EVs, probably more so than I am in many ways. And it might not be of incredible value for this specific group, but for the larger public, I think it's an invaluable resource.
I'm another one who goes to gas car shows with my electric car for a number of reasons. But the biggest question I get is I can't afford a Tesla. So I'm taking my gem car, which is a golf cart on steroids, out to some of the little junker yards, the cash and carry yards, whatever you want to call them. There are two of them here that have Tesla Model S's. I approached the first one and told him about Recurrent and gave him the sheet that I've got on a used Tesla or a used car, used EV. They get a $4,000 rebate from their taxes. And the guy kind of took a little bit of a deep breath and said, whoa, maybe I don't have to dump the price anymore. But what he's running into is the madman at Tesla who keeps dumping his prices, and all of a sudden they're competing with the new car for the business with their used car. One of them has a 2015, I think, really a pretty car. And the other one, I think, has an 18. But still in all, and I haven't talked to the other guy yet. But, armed with that, I think I'm giving them a leg up on trying to sell their cars. And the last time all of a sudden I've gotten close with just the Tesla Model S's, but last time I looked at overall used electric vehicles, there were something like 297 of them for sale on cars.com and Carfax. So, I mean, they're out there. It's just a matter of those people that are looking for an electric car. This is the way to get in my estimation. That's my song and dance.
Well, I mean, in Colorado, I just told someone this because they were asking for advice. In Colorado, I don't know what a good idea it is to buy a used EV, because with all the incentives, and I went and looked at some of the prices of used EVs, with all the incentives, if you buy an EV that's like a couple of years old, you're going to be paying more than if you bought a used one, because the used prices, of course, are based on nationwide, prices. So most states don't have incentives. So you can probably get a new one. I mean, depending on how far back you want to go as far as used, but you can probably get a new one for less price in Colorado than a used ones. I mean, really, all the used dealers should just ship them outside the state.
You have to keep in mind those people that would normally be looking at a used car don't have the tax liability to cover a $7,500 federal tax rebate, because they don't have the tax liability to cover it. And so therefore you cannot include that one. So that makes a big change in it.
Yeah, although in next year, that's not going to be a tax liability anymore. So, and hopefully the dealers won't jack up the prices as a result.
We'll just add those additional costs to the national debt, right? For tax incentives for electric cars.
I think Colorado has the best tax incentives rebate schedule of any state, including California. So
they had just changed that too.
What?
They say they had just changed that recently too. It was at 2,500 for a new car, and they upped it.
Effective July 1st this year, it was increased to $5,000 to your
Yep.
point.
Yep.
Well, I just put in the chat what it would cost to buy a brand new Chevy Bolt. You could get it for $5,500 after being eligible for all those different credits, the federal incentive, the Colorado incentive, the additional incentive because the car is priced under $35,000, and the vehicle exchange program. If you buy a junker for $200 that I was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I feel we really need to get the word out. Cause I mean, it's probably hard to find a Chevy Bolt, but I mean, even, you know, whatever, a ID4 or Model 3 or whatever.
Right, any car under 35,000.
Yeah, I mean, the federal one doesn't, unfortunately, there aren't that many cars that qualify for it.
On lease still, right?
What?
Doesn't the Nissan Leaf still sell for under 35?
Yeah, but I don't think it qualifies for the federal as far as materials made in the United States. I don't think it does.
Yeah, right. Does that U.S. content apply for the incentive if you buy a used one? Does the used one have to be made in North America?
I don't think so. I think that they don't have. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, someone. I don't think that there are any restrictions. And at the beginning of the year too, the restrictions for the materials for the battery and the car, I think it is, are going to get stricter. So so the federal government has this sort of thing where every period of time, I don't know, year or whatever, they're going to kind of make it more and more strict. So so some of the vehicles that get the full federal credit this year may not get the full federal credit next year.
There is and to be clear, this is well outside my lane, anything tax credit related. But for the group's awareness, if you're not already aware, there is a tool that the U.S. Department of Energy has for calculating the federal tax credit for EVs. I just put the link in the chat. It allows you to plug in the make, the model year, the model, etc. And that is as I mentioned, a U.S. Department of Energy resource that we don't have any involvement with, but it might be worth checking out if anyone's curious.
And one thing about this, I think I looked at that, and there's another page where I think it was this page, another page where you can put in a VIN. And that's actually, if you want to really double check your vehicle, do that, because there's some vehicles that have different batteries. So it may have one battery, it may have another battery, depending on where the manufacturer got the batteries from. And some of them may qualify and some of them may not. So it gets even more complicated there, where you might think that you're going to get the federal incentive, or at least half of it, and then you don't, because that particular car happened to have a battery that wasn't that didn't meet the qualifications.
I think that one that you're referring to with the vehicle identification number is related to the IRS website.
Oh, okay.
One additional resource that does not directly tie into this subject, but this group might find of interest, putting in the chat now. We at the state, we have a public dashboard that provides information on the number of EVs in Colorado, charging ports, and all sorts of other great data. So when you're going to auto shows talking about EVs, you might find this of interest.
Just to let you know, that particular link that you put in there, plus the EV Colorado link, are both listed on the back page of our newsletter.
I was not aware of that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, if you look at the last page of the newsletter, we've tried to keep that up with just about every group, organization, or EV related thing, like EVco and some of the other stuff, on that back page. So that's fun.
Well, thank you.
Hopefully a good resource we try to keep up with. Right, Judith?
By the way, I went to your link for the to see which cars qualify, and no Nissan cars qualify for the federal tax credit.
Well, it looks like we've about circled the block. Any last minute questions? Well, we want to thank Ed and also Ron for coming on and enlightening us. We're recording this. It will be up on our YouTube site in a few days when our person that does that gets it up there. And we'll be having that link in our newsletter so people can, that missed it and wanted to see it, will be able to go to our YouTube site and see what we did today.
Thank you, Ron and Ed.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Bye-bye.